Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of High Tech Low Code podcast. Today, the topic at hand is the Low Code, No Code platform Five. And to aid us with that subject, we have the company of Dominik Keller and Tiago Neves. Dominick is a COO and co-founder of Five. Dominick, thank you for joining us on this episode. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, very excited to be here, and thank you a lot for having me.
Again, thank you for giving us this opportunity. And before we focus on Tiago, I would like to ask if you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely, happy to. So my name is Dominick. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Five. Five is a startup in the low-code industry. I think you just mentioned we are low-code, no-code. I think one of the topics that we'll be speaking about today is that I believe there's a difference between no-code, low-code, and I very deliberately choose the words low-code to describe Five, and I'll explain a little bit why I do so later. About myself and my background, maybe first things first, I'm not a developer by education. Originally, my background is actually in finance, but I've spent most of my career working at software companies. So I come from a software company that was selling ERP solutions to the construction industry, a very complex industry, and likewise a very complex and sophisticated solution. I have a very keen interest, I'd say, in technology and how technology merges with business. I did try to learn a little bit of coding in the past. I dabbled a little bit in JavaScript, Python, SQL. Also got interested in business intelligence and dashboarding, but I wouldn't call myself a coder. And yeah, now I'm working at Five. I'm one of the co-founders, the late co-founder, I'd say. I joined the team a little bit after my other two co-founders, Mark and Jason, the CEO and CTO. And we're trying to build a world-class low-code company with Five. So that's what we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, finally, Tiago, what about you? How are you doing?
Yes, doing great and really excited for another episode. In this case, to hear from Dominick, not just about Five, but also his journey. And I think it's going to be an interesting one.
Definitely. We already started off with knowing that Dominick has a clear point of view on between the no code and low code, but we'll get to that in a few seconds or minutes. So Dominick, tell us a little about your company, Five. What is Five and why is it called Five, by the way?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question and a question we get a lot. Now, to explain our name, I have to step back a little bit and we actually have to look at the evolution of software engineering. Obviously, software engineering didn't just start yesterday. It goes back a couple of decades. And when you actually look at the evolution of programming languages, you can see that we used to communicate with computers using machine code, right? The ones and zeros, the instructions that a computer can literally understand without an interpreter. And those languages were called first generation languages. Thank God we're not using them anymore because they were very, very complicated. And we've moved on since to second generation languages, which were still low level assembly languages. Nowadays, most of the languages that we use are considered third generation languages, your C#, your JavaScript, you name it. And there were some attempts at fourth generation languages, which have become even more human-like, so easier to read and easier to write. Some people would consider SQL and Python to be fourth generation languages, especially SQL obviously is very easy to read. Select star from where is very easily understandable. But that's really where the evolution of programming languages has stopped. Now, with Five, we see ourselves as part of that evolution. We're not a fifth generation language, or we're not a new language to write software, but we'd like to take software engineering to the next level of simplification. And that's why we've chosen the name Five. Our name is also a little bit of a giveaway of who we're focused on. Obviously, this history of programming languages is not really known to people who don't work in software, and it's fine if they don't know. But it's very much known to anyone who has studied computer sciences or IT, I'd say. Usually people, with a background in computer engineering, when we start speaking about 1GLs and 2GLs, they get it. And these are really the people that we focus on with our low-code solution. So Five is essentially a platform that makes it easier to create device-agnostic web applications. And you can use a lot of prefabricated building blocks or point-and-click elements. But you can, in fact, also use a lot of full code inside Five. And that's a very deliberate choice that we made in our product architecture, because we believe that high-quality software is still created by software engineers who knows what they're doing. And they typically want to write code because writing code is what they love doing, what they've learned doing. And we give them that option right inside Five. So yeah, Five, the company name, as I said, comes from the evolution of software engineering. And we're very much focused on the software engineer as our target customer, you could say, target user.
Great. Okay. So from your point of view, who is the ideal user for low code or no code?
Well, I would respond to this question by saying that we first need to differentiate between no code and low code, because to me, these are two fundamentally different approaches to creating software. And it's worth having that distinction because we see so many platforms out there in the industry, and some of them are really no code and others are really low code. Now, speaking about the ideal user, I would say that the ideal user for a no-code platform, which really eliminates code, is someone who has never written code before. Mm-hmm. They can use these platforms, they can use WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, drag and drop, and they can build applications with it. Now, low-code, on the other hand, comes from more of a software engineering angle. And the ideal user of a low-code platform for me is a software engineer who knows about all of the complexity that goes into the software development process. For me, this distinction comes back to the distinction between programming on the one hand and software engineering on the other hand. Again, these are two things that easily get confused, but programming is really just the act of writing code. And a no-code platform essentially abstracts away all of the code, and you don't have to write code anymore, and you can program without writing code. Software engineering, on the other hand, the engineering in software engineering already gives it away, is a complex process where you actually go through multiple different steps, multiple different iterations, testing, deploying the application onto the right infrastructure, making sure that it can support edge cases. And the low-code platforms really support more of the software engineering rather than just the program. And that's where I see the distinction. So as I said, for me, the ideal users, first of all, we have to differentiate between no-code and low-code. And no-code users, the perfect user is someone who hasn't written code before, even though there is a learning curve. And low-code users are really software developers or software engineers who want to build applications faster, but in a proper software engineering process.
Okay, I see. Tiago, anything you would like to add?
Not add to that, but curious to understand Dominik's point of view in what for me. So just what is no code and low code for? Overall, just in terms of the overall context, we're trying here also to help productivity, help with the fact that there are millions of job posts out there that not being filled. So the demand for software engineers and so on is really high. One is so to address that lack of skills in the market. But one personally that I really see low code, no code being well fit to address is what's been a lack of communication, collaboration, of really positive collaboration, I would say, between business and IT. How do you see just Five, for instance, helping, basically facilitating that collaboration?
I think on the collaboration part, one thing that's really important is that typically as a business user, you want to see quick results. For the software engineer at the moment to show quick results, you would produce something of a wireframe or mockup, but typically without the backend, right? If you look at some of the more popular mockup software, it's just a UI that you're creating. Now, with low code, you actually give a software engineer the tool to create real software at the speed of mockups, I would say. So the full stack development. And that can actually help the collaboration a lot because it already, it's a working piece of software that people can try. I think the other part in terms of collaboration is that on low code, some of the very easy tasks, which might not necessarily need the input of a trained software engineer, those could be handed over to a business user. For example, adjusting sort of the way the application looks a little bit, or form creation, or building out your emails if you have notifications in the mail merge, things like that. And again, that's where a business user can be more hands-on. But for the overall delivery process, I believe that especially in the business context, you still want your software engineers to be in charge of the application creation, because so many things in software development can go wrong. And as I said, I'm not a developer, but I tried my hands on sort of no-code platforms. And just when you start on the back end and you think about the database and how you need to store data in a way that's efficient, as a business user, you don't have that mindset of figuring out what that means. How do you build a relational database in the right way? And that's where a software developer can really help and should be in charge. But yeah, just on the collaboration, as I said, I think it's a little bit about going beyond just mockups, and it's also about enabling business users maybe to help with some of the easier tasks of software development, where you don't necessarily need the full training of a software developer to carry out those tasks.
Okay. Dominic, how would you describe the low-code, no-code landscape of nowadays?
Well, I think overall, at least that was my impression as we entered the industry and looked at different vendors, different solutions. It is a fairly complex industry, and I'd actually love to hear Tiago's thoughts on this too, how he would characterize the landscape. For me, the first distinction, as I said, it's about knowing, am I looking for a no-code platform that doesn't allow me to use code, or am I looking for a low-code platform that is more made for software engineers? That really helps already filtering out solutions. Now, if I want to take that evaluation a little bit further and I want to look at the landscape and actually understand it, I would go through a technology evaluation and a commercial evaluation of these different platforms. On the technology side, I think it helps to ask 3 questions. Now, the very first question, it's a surprisingly simple question, but one that really helps a lot, is what do I get when I hit deploy? Different low-code, no-code platforms produce different things. You could, for example, use a platform to automate a repetitive task. You could build a business process. Other platforms might help you build a web application. And other platforms, again, help you build chatbots. But really understanding what it is that you get from a low-code, no-code platform, because this label is used so widely nowadays. That's the first question to answer. The second question for me to get a better grasp of the landscape is to look at how much process thinking is inside each one of these different platforms. And this comes back to the point that I made earlier. Am I looking at a platform that simply helps abstract away code? So is it just about the programming part of software engineering, or am I looking at a platform that actually has some software engineering thinking inside it? And good questions to ask are, for example, do I have a development, staging, and production environment for my application? We've worked together with companies where the company originally started on a no-code platform, and every change that they made was automatically pushed out into production. As that company grew, this became very, very difficult to manage, because obviously sometimes the changes that you make don't have the intended outcomes. And eventually, they had to move away from that no-code vendor, because real software is not built in a way where every change automatically goes live into production. You want to make sure you can go through that development, staging, production, through those 3 environments. And the last question I think I would ask if I was evaluating platforms is my platform extensible? So usually in almost every software project that I've seen, people have new ideas about the things that they would like to do in the future. Even if we try to define the requirements early on, new ideas pop up, new technologies come up, and you want to evolve your application over time. And that's where I believe having an idea whether my low-code, no-code platform can actually support these changes in the future is really, really important, because I want to make sure I'm not hitting a brick wall in my development. That's where I believe actually asking the question, can the platform support full code, can be very, very helpful, because full code ultimately means full flexibility and the ability to extend a solution. So this is really the technology evaluation. Speaking about the commercial evaluation of different platforms, I think the landscape in low-code, no-code is really, really interesting, because we see so many different pricing models in the industry. And the reason we see them is that as a vendor, I can never know what my user, my developer is creating on top of my low-code, no-code platform. Could be a consumer-facing application with millions of users, or it could be a departmental application that has 10 users from Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So I've got to think about what will the application actually cost me to run. And as I said, we see a lot of different pricing models in the industry. And I think the best question to ask to make these pricing models comparable is, how much will 100 users cost me for 1 year? Because then I make pricing models comparable. I have a time frame, I have a user number in mind, and I can evaluate commercially whether it's the right platform for me. Generally speaking, if you want to build a consumer-facing app with low-code, no-code, you probably don't want to have an end-user-facing or an end-user-based pricing model, because it could become very, very expensive as your end users grow. If you're building an application for a department, on the other hand, where your headcount is going to be 10 this year and maybe 12 next year, then end-user-based pricing might be correct. But again, that's something I have to think through as I want to understand the landscape. Also, if you're not a large enterprise, you probably don't want to go into an enterprise platform, because you don't need all of the enterprise features that enterprise platforms give you. I think the last question, just in terms of understanding the low-code, no-code landscape, apart from, as I said, these technology-related questions and the commercial question, is the question, what is the lifespan of my code? And this is a really, really interesting question, because usually as we produce software, we have in mind how long this software is supposed to run. We might create something as a startup or a scale-up that only is supposed to help me test an idea for 6 months. So my application has a lifespan of 6 months, and after 6 months, I evaluate whether the idea that I had was successful or not. And then I'm going to kill the application and move on to maybe something that's written in full code. If, on the other hand, I want to write a business application that has a lifespan of the next 3 years, 5 years, then I want to make sure I use something that I can also support and maintain for the next 3 to 5 years. And that's where I believe standard technologies are very important. Tiago just spoke about the skills gap that we have in development. It's very hard to find developers. So if I'm developing an app, I want to make sure I create the app in technologies where I can easily find skills. So inside Five, for example, you can use JavaScript, SQL, some of the most commonly used programming languages. And the reason you can do that is that we believe if you want to maintain that application over multiple years, you can very easily find developers with skills in JavaScript and SQL in the job market. You're not relying on a proprietary technology, for example. And in this way, very long answer to the question of how I would look at the low-code, no-code landscape. But these are just some of the questions that I would ask to actually make sense of this landscape, understanding it from a technology point of view, commercial point of view, and thinking about what is the lifespan of the code or of the application that I want to create.
It's interesting to hear that, Dominic, and kind of looking back to this landscape of where we started with low-code, which I guess it was even before the actual word low-code came about, but how also I see the maturity of let's say of the concept, which I think that it's good to hear what you just said, in the sense of what I think was in the beginning, this industry trying to either cater for the IT department or for the business, meaning that there was this message that, so you have the citizen developers, you have here this tool, you can get your business people, analytical, to basically build the app, they can do all of this on their own, etc. I don't think that's true. I think that it was the wrong message to have. And at the same time, it was a little bit scary for the IT, because they were just thinking that, oh, this is come to replace us. And I think that, so I'm glad to see just how things have evolved, because I really see low code, no code kind of being there for actually uniting these two. And so taking the best out of what is the business knowledge, so what is knowing about the business logic, etc., being able to have that contribution coming in, but at the same time, so facilitating IT in the sense that they're also not going to be replacing, meaning that they're going to still be going through SQL language, and so optimizing queries and this and that. And so it's just a new feature, I guess. So just allowing us to evolve to the next stage. And I think that some points, personally, obviously, but there was too much of a conversation that was too biased. It was citizen developers and what's that mean and so on. It's so hearing from you, it's good to see. So obviously there are many low-code or no-code vendors coming in the last few years, especially. So that is also something I like to hear from you about next. But it's good to see that I think we're kind of getting in the right path, I guess, with this. So from what I heard, that is also your vision with Five being there, and so trying to get this together to provide basically value to the company that is paying for your technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, I agree with you. I think in the marketing messaging of a lot of platforms nowadays, or in the past, the citizen developer and the promises regarding citizen development were probably a little bit too big, because software engineering is complex. Just if you look at the different layers of a software, for example, I think a citizen developer typically comes in and thinks about an application starting from the presentation layer or the UI, whereas a real software engineer actually typically thinks about the underlying data structure. And that already explains the difference, how these two types of people are very different and what that means for the software development process. The way that we look at the market at Five is that it's not so much about what you want to build. Yes, you can use a no-code platform to build a web application, and yes, you can use a low-code platform to build a web application. So the outcome is the same. The question is more about, how do I build this? And what's the process that I'm following as I build it? And that's where I said, software engineering has not just the software development languages have evolved over time, but also the methodology and the thinking about how we develop software in the right way has evolved. As I said earlier, I think the best example for this is the development, staging, and production environment, which has become sort of the standard flow of developing software in bigger organizations, because applications can be so critical to your business that you want to make sure you go through these 3 steps. There are other things such as debugging, for example, or an efficient way to store data, or being able to understand the underlying infrastructure of an application. What's the virtual machine that the application is running on, and what do I get in terms of backups on my database? In a no-code environment, these choices are typically made by the vendor for you, because the expectation is that the citizen developer doesn't need to understand all of these details. For us at Five, in a low-code environment, we actually give the developer the ability to make these choices and to build applications. And this is really, coming back to this citizen developer versus software engineer process. Yes, there are certainly points where we can make the collaboration more efficient between these 2 personas and these 2 types of people. But if we want to have high-quality software that can run for an extended amount of time, that's maintainable, that has good code in it, that's clean, that's scalable, having that oversight from the software engineer, I believe, is very, very important.
Interesting. Now, one thing you've mentioned pricing models, and you also mentioned thinking about how much will it cost you 100 users per year. That is quite important to ask. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, generally speaking, when you work in the software industry, one of the first things that you learn is that there are software companies that compete in the enterprise segment, and there are software companies that don't compete in the enterprise segment. And enterprise really means serving big multinational companies. Now, if I was a smaller company, I could look at these enterprise companies, but one thing that I'll very quickly find out is that usually buying enterprise software is quite expensive. The reason that it's expensive is that these software solutions have enterprise features, such as single sign-on, compliance and security features that a centralized IT department would want to see. And I think it's very important that, as I look at this low-code, no-code landscape, and if I'm not a big enterprise, I probably don't want to look at these enterprise platforms, because they can get very expensive quite quickly for me. And as I said, I think that's where asking the question, how much will 100 users cost me for 1 year, is super important in understanding what the cost implications are. If I'm a startup or a smaller organization, or maybe a app development agency, I might not want to build something where in the end, the low-code vendor charges me 10 euros per month per end user, because my application might not even create that value for my end users, or it becomes too expensive if I get too many end users on it. And that's where I said I need to understand, first of all, am I looking at enterprise platforms and non-enterprise platforms? And I need to understand how does the pricing evolve over time. For us at Five, we believe actually that the best pricing model is linked to the consumption of the application that the application creates on the cloud. So instead of charging by end user, we charge by the underlying environment that an application uses on top of AWS, which is the cloud provider that we are using. And in this way, a developer on top of Five can actually choose the underlying virtual machine that's used for their application. They get a single tenant environment, and whatever the cost of that environment is, which is under the control of the developer, that's how much you pay to run the application, with a management fee obviously going to Five. And that's a very fair and transparent pricing model for us. And it's really, really important to understand how these pricing models operate, and looking at them from the perspective of the application that I want to build. Because as I said, different pricing models might not be right for different types of applications. And ultimately, as an end user, I want to have that transparency of understanding, what the application will cost me over a year to support my users.
Yet again, so I think it's good to see these new ideas and concepts, even about pricing, which we know obviously, so it's an important factor. But I think we're kind of too standardized, I guess, so in terms of pricing in the industry. So you pay something by user or by app, and that's it. And it's good to see also some flexibility in the pricing. Obviously, each company will have their own targets, which part of the market they're trying to gain. But it's good to see at least some flexibility in how you price things, and because in the end, so it is important to give a business certainty so about how much you're going to end up paying when you start using it, but also be transparent, be simple, I guess, so from that pricing perspective, and not be a factor that will get in the way of the adoption, or in the relation with the vendor, because you're discussing about how do we calculate the final price that you're paying. So let's make it simple, transparent, and flexible. I think those are important for both sides, so to make it happen, to make the industry successful.
So Dominic, what's your point of view on HighCode versus LowCode? Like, are there different approaches to each one of them, or can they complement each other?
Well, I guess my point of view, or my answer on this, is quite clear based on some of the things that I've mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Maybe I can back this up by some of our customer stories. So we, for example, have a customer that wanted to build something that resembles an eBay, an auctioning platform. And they were able to build it actually originally as a prototype using just Google Sheets and a little bit of Google Scripts. But it was very limited in the way it ran. There were some problems in terms of getting live bids, or even running live auctions based on time. And that's where, when we started speaking to them, we noticed to implement such a system, which has a, I'd say fairly high degree of complexity, because you really want to run a live auction, or you might have multiple auctions running at the same time. You have many different user profiles. That's where you needed a little bit of full code to make that happen. So based on this story, yes, there's a lot that you can do without writing code, but for these last 10 to 20%, which ultimately create the uniqueness of a solution, that's where code came in and made it, much easier to build such a system and to fully automate it. Another client of ours, they've built an app originally on a no-code platform, which was a matching service between newly hired credits and mentors inside a company. Now, in order to do this matching on the original no-code solution, there was a little bit of manual input required, because basically someone would submit the answers, you would see what their profile is and what their interests are, and then you would match them to a mentor. But this couldn't be automated in the no-code environment. Why? Because this matching algorithm, or whatever you want to call it, again, was a little bit too complex to be created in a full no-code environment or even a low-code environment. That's again where those last 10 to 20% of the application, which make the application unique, required full code. So long story short, for me, full code and low code are complementary approaches where you probably use 60, 70, 80% in low code, meaning point and click or drag and drop. But for the last bits and pieces that really make the application unique, that's where you might want to use, just a little bit of code, a little bit of JavaScript, a certain function, an algorithm, where you just need to write code to make that happen. You could probably do it manually, but then you're sort of getting input from your customer, and then you have to work on it manually. So if you really want to automate it all the way through, then you need full code. And that's really the philosophy that we're taking at Five. We believe that software development, a lot of elements inside the software are the same. Whether you look at a CRM system, an order management system, you name it, sort of these typical business systems, they all gather information and they display information, and there's some business logic behind it. But every now and then you still need that little piece of code for the unique elements of an application. And as I said, that's how we built Five as a low-code environment. We give a lot of pre-built components, but you can use code, full code or HighCode, whatever you want to call it, almost anywhere to make sure the application has that unique element in the end.
Okay. Dominic, I have to ask you a very big question now.
Yeah.
What makes Five different from the other solutions on the market?
Right, that is a very big question. Let me try to give my best answer. So Five, we started out around sort of 1.5 years ago. I think that gave us the luxury of choosing a very modern tech stack. I think, if you look at the two big low-code vendors in the market, Mendix and OutSystems, they're just moving to the cloud. We were born in the cloud, which I believe is a bit of an advantage. It's just how software is done right nowadays. We're an in-browser IDE, you could call us. For example, apps also developed with Five. They are containerized, they're portable, they are run consistently on any kind of infrastructure. The other thing is, as I said, you can use full code inside Five almost anywhere and in almost any language. We use something that's called WebAssembly. Now it gets a little bit technical, but WebAssembly is essentially a compilation target to use programming languages inside your browser and on the internet. So, in the future, someone who might have coding skills in C# can actually write C# right inside Five to create a web application. And this makes us, lets us support full code in almost any language. And last but not least, it's that focus on the how of how is software being built, the focus on software engineering, being able to deal with things such as I said, deployment to multiple environments, having a debugger, being able to deal with database changes very easily, choosing the virtual machine for your production environment. We are also extremely good in managing different application instances, for example. So all of this software engineering thinking went into Five. And I think that's really what makes us a little bit different. We call this low code for real developers. So we want to cater to the real software engineers while still being a low code platform, which can be a bit of a challenge because we notice that software developers might not always like to hear the words no code, low code. I think, Tiago, you sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier. But we do believe that low code is actually the next step in the evolution of software engineering. And as I said, that the ideal user of a low code platform is a software engineer. And yeah, we're trying to build this low code solution for the real software developers.
That's awesome. With that said, so what's next for you in Five?
Right. Well, a lot of work happening behind the scenes at the moment. We were quite fortunate in converting some of these early adopters, some of the stories that I just shared into customers, actually. However, we're not available yet as a general release. We're just working on that, actually. At the moment, if software developers are keen to give Five a go, they can go onto our website and sign up, and I hop on a phone call with them. I walk them through the system, and they can get early access to it ahead of the proper full release. We're very keen, and we're working with web development agencies, freelancers, sort of usually SMEs that have custom software applications running that they want to rebuild or modernize. Those are the people that we love to work with and that we have worked with in the past. And yeah, the target is for this year to make a dent basically inside the developer community, to find developers that want to work with us, give them access to Five, and to grow the company into, as I said, a low-code solution for real software developers.
Tiago, anything you would like to ask Dominic?
Not ask, it's just how I'm excited I am just about Five and what Dominic just shared with us, because it's good to see this, and I certainly believe so that those leaders out there need to watch out, because there are newcomers with just being ready and for what's happening right now, and just in that. Just taking advantage, so having been born later also in a way, but just be more on a more modern tech stack and learn from others and so on. And it's great to hear from Dominic about Five and what you have in the roadmap. Sounds really exciting, and looking forward to see what comes next in the next few years for you.
Yeah, maybe two last points from my side. Just letting know people where to find us. So our website is five.co, and Five is spelled out as FYEVE. And the other thing, obviously, Five will be made available actually for free. So if someone wants to try out Five, as I said, there's no cost involved, and they can get started. And I'm happy to show them the system and what we're working on.
Cool beans. Glad to hear that then. Okay, and with that, we announce the end of today's podcast. Thank you very much, Dominic and Tiago, for joining today's episode. We'd also like to send a big thank you to everyone who is listening, and I hope you can join us on our next episode of High Tech Low Code Podcast, where, as always, we'll talk about more topics from the tech universe. Speak soon. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Bye.